the mouse point. When you move your mouse, you get a trail.
Oh, that's neat.
All right, we are recording. Everybody say hi to Sarita.
Hi.
Jeff did post last week's on the Anchor YouTube channel, so you're welcome to go there if you want to catch up. This week we're going to continue where we were and then finish sort of the introduction to this book. I wondered why I took 2 weeks to do the introduction, but the book, come on in. The book is so large and it's so contextually bound with what's happening in history that I thought it was important that we at least have a common understanding. I need to do that for myself because I was not as familiar with the history part of the Old Testament as others. So that's kind of why I did that. Last week, if you remember, we read a verse, Isaiah 42, 8 and 9, that reads like this: I am the Lord, that is my name. I will not yield my glory to another, or my praise to idols. See, the former things have taken place, and new things I declare. And before they spring into being, I announce them to you. God reminds us that he is sovereign. He will declare new things before they occur, so that when they occur, we know that he's the truth. We know that he is sovereign. And here in this verse from chapter 14:27, we have that same idea. Surely as I have planned, so it will be. And as I have purposed, so it will happen. One of the things that Isaiah does repeatedly is speak for God about God saying, I am providing this information before it happens so that you will know, so that you can have faith. We'll see in Ahaz's example, that's the reading where that really comes out to play, so that you can have faith. Because Ahaz, you have no faith. But I'm telling you, this will happen so that you can have that faith. And that becomes sort of a major theme, and we'll see that. I don't know if you've noticed that, but every week starts with a different picture and a different quote. I'd like some applause because that took quite a bit of time for me to take it.
I didn't get the picture.
Yeah, it's a different picture, a different quote. And it's either a messianic or a theme.
And it's done so very well.
It is.
Yeah. My daughter had to figure out for me how to do the transparency thing so that I can put just the picture and not the background that actually what that picture was from, so that it shows. So a little kudo to her.
It makes it look 3D. That's really nice.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for the accolades. I get them so rarely, so it's nice to have.
Yeah, I know.
Okay, I did click the button, did I not? Oh, there it is. Okay, recap last week. Now, some of you were here last week and some of you weren't. So those that you weren't here, just ask the people around you. They can fill you in. I don't want to say you missed a lot, but you missed some really important stuff as we talked about who the kings were during this period of time, what sort of the history background. And so what we did last week is we answered some basic questions of the who and the when and the why of Isaiah. And those questions are important. We stressed several times that Isaiah really is a bridge between the Old Testament idea of obedience to the covenant and the New Testament idea of faith in Christ, of the salvation that God offers through grace, through faith, that we read about in the New Testament. And it's not that the Old Testament saints didn't have faith. Read Hebrews 11. It's full of the heroes of the faith from the Old Testament. Or that the New Testament saints don't have to obey. Of course they did. But I think the emphasis shifts, and Isaiah is really the bridge between that emphasis. We also talked about the importance of Isaiah in the New Testament, that 54 of the 66 chapters of Isaiah are quoted somewhere in the New Testament. They're quoted by Jesus. They're quoted by the gospel writers. They're quoted by Peter and James and John in their letters. And of course, they're quoted by Peter Isaiah had a tremendous influence on the writers of the New Testament because of that book's influence that's already there in the first century within Jewish culture, within Judaism, and within Jewish theology. And that's why the New Testament authors quote him so much. And even more than quotes, they use the same kind of imagery and the same sort of metaphors and the same sort of illustrations that Isaiah used. We read, or we sang Christ Alone, Cornerstone, Isaiah. We'll read that in 7 weeks. I don't remember the verse, but it came up today. Okay, we also talked about the kings. We talked about Uzziah, and we said he was a pretty good guy, but he got a little full of himself, and he decided he would do what a priest should do. He would take that role. I'm the king, I can do this. And then he was judged and had leprosy for the remainder of his life. And then his son, Jotham, who sort of learned a lesson from his father and kind of stayed the straight and narrow through his life. And that raised his son, Ahaz, and we'll read quite a bit more about Ahaz, but he completely abandoned God. He completely abandoned Yahweh. And he followed the way the northern kings did. And we noted as we read his history that it wasn't that he didn't follow in the ways of his father Jotham. It's he didn't follow in the ways of his father David. He was not operating like the kings of Judah, this line of David. No, he was operating like these, the northern kingdom kings. And then we talked about Hezekiah. And Hezekiah was a good guy all around. He's a reformer. He reforms the temple. He reforms the worship. And he brings people back to God. And he's also described as he is like his father David. So he's restoring sort of that Davidic line that's on the right of your King's chart. And so that brings us really to that chart, which kind of looked like this. We looked at this last week. Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. We said Isaiah starts at the very end of Uzziah's reign, through Jotham, 16 years, through Ahaz, 16 years, and through the first part of Hezekiah's reign. A total of 42 years that Isaiah prophesied, and he covers that. This week, I want to cover some of the prophets that were also contemporaries. And which ones would you, from looking at that chart, which ones are contemporaries of Isaiah, would you say? Not a hard question.
Micah.
Micah. And who did Micah preach to? Well, it's to the southern kingdom. It's on this side. It's to the southern kingdom. What are the other contemporaries? Well, it's on the chart.
I'm looking down there.
No, this is well past. This is after the exile.
Well, what's on the screen for?
I'm sorry.
Sorry, I couldn't resist. I apologize.
Yeah, I know. I'm resisting doing this. So. Oh, the two other ones there on the right-hand side are Amos, that preaches to the northern kingdom, and Hosea, who preaches to the southern kingdom. Some of you were in the Minor Prophets class last year, and so you know all of this information. So I will call on you. If you remember, Hosea was a prophet, and God said, go marry this promiscuous woman. This woman who's going to cheat on you, is going to have affairs with other men, so that you will be an example of how I feel when I have done all of this for the nation, and you guys are following idols. So he's an example, a representation of what God's doing. And if you remember from the Minor Prophets, I was blown away by this when I had read this, and I shared this with you then. But before I share that, how do I know he's a contemporary? Just because he's on the chart? No. If you read Hosea, this is the word of the Lord that came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah. Those sound familiar. Kings of Judah, and Jeroboam, son of Jehoash, king of Israel. He's preaching to the northern kingdom, so you have a reference to that northern kingdom king, but you also have these same kings. So, okay, he is a contemporary then of Isaiah. One of the things that that Hosea does with this promiscuous woman that he was asked to marry, to be an example, an illustration for the people of how God feels, as he has 3 children. One of the children is Jezreel. And what God says about that is your sin disqualifies you from being a light to the nations, to be the blessing that's to the nations that's I promised through Abraham. And then his second child, Lo Ruhamah, what God says about her is that you are no longer my chosen one, the chosen people of Israel, and that you are no longer it. You are disqualified from that. And then the third child, Lo Ami, God says is that you are no longer my people. And so it is really a stark rebuke of the northern kingdom. You're not the light. You're not my loved one. And you are no longer my people. But God is not just a God of judgment. God is an act of incredible mercy, a God of incredible mercy. And we read later in Zechariah, which is after the Babylonian exile. And he says, in that day I will respond, declares the Lord. And I will respond to the skies, and I will respond to the earth. Remember that later. I'll come back to that one. And the earth will respond to the grain, the new wine, and the olive oil, and they will respond to the first child, the Jezreel. I will plant her for myself in the land, and I'll show my love for the one called not my loved one, Lo Ruhamah. And I will say to those called not my people, the Lo Ami, you are my people. And they will say, you are my God. Even in the midst of that judgment that God's going to lay on the northern kingdom, the decimation by Assyria, the judgment for their sin, that you're no longer my people, you're no longer the light, you are no longer my loved one. I will still restore. I will still bring you this promise that I've had. I haven't changed. I am just. I am holy. I will render judgment. But through that judgment, a remnant will remain. And through that remnant, you will be restored. And you will again be called my people, my loved one, the light of the nations. It's a beautiful, beautiful passage. We read that last year when we did the Minor Prophets. And I just think it's one of the things where God says, you know, you're reading all of these harsh words from me, but my heart is really one of mercy. And I will keep a remnant and I will restore. So that's Hosea. That's one of those that we read. The former things are forgotten, the new will come. And God just shows that through here. The next one we have is Amos. And what we remember about Amos, those that were here last year, what do you remember about Amos? Hint, it's on the screen. Need another hint? What do you remember? At least read what's on the screen. Okay, that's familiar. That should be familiar to us as U.S. citizens. Why? Martin Luther King in his I Have a Dream speech. And he's talking about the injustice that he sees. Amos talks a lot about injustice that he sees in the northern kingdom. Hosea talked about the idolatry a lot. And Amos talks a lot about the injustice, how they were treating each other. And what Amos is saying is judgment needs to happen here because you are in violation of the covenant you have with God at Sinai. You are ready for judgment. You are ripe for judgment. And when it comes, it's going to roll down like a river and wash you away. And that's exactly what happens when the Assyrians come. But Martin Luther King does it in a separate way. He saw in his dream a salvation where his children would not be judged by the color of the skin, but by the content of their character. He saw something after the judgment. Our nation had to be judged for the policies that we had in Martin Luther King's day. But after that, he saw something better. He saw that same restoration of a nation great where we're colorblind and we're judged by our character and not by our color. He saw that just as a man living in our nation. But it's the same thing that Amos saw as well. And how do we know Amos is a contemporary? These are the words of Amos, who was among the shepherders of Tekoa, what he saw concerning Israel 2 years before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, okay, that's familiar, who was king of Judah, and Jeroboam, the son of Jehoash, who was the king of Israel. Again, he preaches to the northern kingdom, so there's a reference to that northern kingdom king. Okay, and then who's the next one? Who's the next contemporary? Micah. What do we remember about Micah? Please read the screen.
Act justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God.
Oh, yeah.
What a beautiful, it's simple. This is all God wants.
That's all God wants.
This is all. And what do I expect of man? It's simple. Love justice. Or act justly. Love mercy. Walk humbly with your God. Don't go out on your own. Walk with me. Walk with me as we are the light for the other nations. Walk with me as we're the blessing for the other nations. Don't walk out on your own. Don't be unjust like the northern kingdom. You know, don't be harsh to your fellow. Love mercy. Love the ability to do that. And don't think so highly of yourself. And we'll read a passage of that later against the northern kingdom that talks about the pride of the northern kingdom. But it's really simple. It's a really simple formula. If we could only do that. But as Micah, as we did in the Minor Prophets, Micah realizes the sin of the nation is too great. And he's talking to the southern kingdom. He's saying these are the same sins that you're punishing in the northern kingdom. They're the same ones. There is a passage in Isaiah that's the exact quote of Micah. And I don't know who wrote, but maybe they have the same God, and that's why it's the same. I don't know. But it's a word for word about putting their swords into plowshares, talking about that future vision. But Micah says, you know, the sin's too much. God has to judge. And he also is a contemporary. This is the word of the Lord that came to Micah, the Morashite, in the days of Jotham, Ahaz, Hezekiah, familiar, king of Judah, and what he saw regarding Samaria and Jerusalem, speaking to the southern kingdom. He references the northern kingdom, Samaria, because he sees what's happening there. He says, you're the same. You're ripe for judgment too. And so that's what he preaches.
It was a bit of time before the northern kingdom was defeated, though. Yeah.
Yeah.
Between the southern kingdom.
Right. Yeah, quite a bit. See if I have, I guess I have another. I'm trying to figure out what my next slide is. Oh, okay. We're gonna skip that because I don't know where that goes now. All right, so we had on a screen several slides that reference some things on the right-hand side. And the astute ones noticed that. But what happened during Isaiah's time? While he's a prophet, what happened? What big event happened during Isaiah's time? Hint.
Oh, here it is.
The northern kingdom was defeated.
Yeah, the northern kingdom is defeated. That just happened out of the blue. Huh?
Not likely.
Not likely. No. And as we'll read, the Assyrian Empire is growing in power. They're from the north, from Iran area. They're growing in power, and they're beginning their imperial conquest as they're moving down the coast, getting closer and closer and closer. There's a threat. There's this threat of this power who is Assyria, who's known for their brutality, who's known for their strength, who's known for their desire to strip the land bare and take whatever they can of profit from that. That's growing on the horizon. And you also have Egypt on the south, who's always been a power. So is Egypt going to intercede for us? Is Egypt going to be a friend for us? Is Egypt going to attack us? There's these threats. And there you have kings, the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom. They're doing pretty well. You know, they're financially, they're well. Everything's going well, except they're not following God. They're unjust to their own people. They're unjust to each other. Judgment needs to come, and these threats are happening. And What Isaiah is going to do is address the kings that are in power during that time. Well, if you're a king and you have threats, you have a responsibility, right? You have a responsibility to defend your people. How do you respond to that? A lot of Isaiah is going to hit those themes. So that's the big event that happened during his life. And what has not yet happened?
The exile.
I'm sorry?
The exile.
The exile. Yeah. The northern kingdom, Assyria wipes them out. That happens in his lifetime. Babylonia, which happens 100 and some years later, doesn't happen until after his time, and that's when the southern kingdom is exiled. So those are the two big events that are happening in history concerning Israel. And Isaiah is prophesying during the first one, but he prophesies about the second one. And we'll read quite a bit about that. And so far, we've only read one verse of Isaiah. But hopefully we know something about the times that face the nation, the time that face the kings, the times that Isaiah writes about. And that's kind of why I wanted to spend a little bit of time in this background before we get into Isaiah. Thank you. Yeah, I so love you. We did mention last week that you could divide the book really in two parts. The first part, the first 39 chapters, are about the judgment that's due to the nation of Israel. And the second part is the salvation yet to come. And we read a couple of verses this morning from Hosea. Zechariah was actually the prophet that wrote it, that talked about that restoration, that salvation that'll come to the remnant of the people, the ones that remain after these devastating events of the Assyrian conquest and the Babylonian exile. Isaiah talks about the book in two separate ways. He says, well, the first part of it talks about the former things, and the latter part talks about the latter things. And we have this whole idea of old and new that carries through the New Testament. We're a new creature. The old passes. And so we have that same theme that's from Isaiah. And let me go ahead and pass this out now. You got one? Huh? You got one? For you? Oh, it's one. Okay. It's just one page right back. Now what we're going to do is we're going to the next couple of weeks is we're going to delve into this first part of the book. So you'll find this on the top of the page. If you look at the first 6 chapters,
Thanks.
the first 6 chapters form like a summary of the whole book. Dorothy, you talked last week about how the timing is wrong, and
Yes.
part of that is he kind of does a summary, and then he goes into more detail. Those of you that maybe ever had a class of writing a newspaper article, they talk about put the facts in the first paragraph, and then the details follow on, because not everybody's going to read the 300-word, article. They're going to read the first paragraph. So you want to be able to tell kind of what's going to happen in that first paragraph. A scientific work will have an abstract in the front of it that kind of summarizes the results. That's what this first 6 chapters are. And it breaks down kind of nice. The first chapter summarizes the first part of the book, the judgment part. The next 3 chapters summarize the salvation part. We'll get a hint of it. Then we'll read quite a bit more detail as we get into that. And then chapter 5 talks about what was Israel's role in God's plan. It's kind of an overarching understanding of what is this people of Israel? What were they supposed to do? And then chapter 6 kind of talks about Isaiah's role in that plan. Well, Isaiah's a prophet. What's his role in this plan? Why is God using him? And we'll explore that. Each of those will be about a week, so that'll kind of give you the idea. The second part of this handout, I told you that the last part of this we're going to do take some of the threads of Isaiah and begin to weave them in the tapestry that Isaiah writes. And these are just some of them. I'm just going to give them here to you. So as you read, or as we read on the screen, you'll see that these themes repeat over and over and over. Light and dark, and of course that's very common to us. Light is you associate with God, and dark you associate with not God, the devil. Isaiah will use the city of Jerusalem or Zion or Mount Zion as a personification of the spiritual condition that we are. It's a physical place, of course, but it's a personification of our spiritual condition. You'll see highway or path or way or streams that indicate a movement from where God isn't to where God is. John the Baptist talks about, make straight the way of the Lord. Well, that's directly from Isaiah. It's come from this place of desolation, this place of wilderness, this place of not God, and make a path, make a way to God. And you'll see that illustration or that metaphor over and over again. We'll talk about this one today, I think, a little bit. See, hear, know, and walk. Old versus new, which we talked about. The nations. One of the purposes of the nation of Israel is to be the light to the nations. Well, the nations are important because when you read the end of the book of Revelation 21 or 2, and the New Jerusalem comes down, where are the nations? They are now present. They are now understand who God is. They now understand everything that the nation of Israel was supposed to show them, the light that they're supposed to see, so that they also come to God. We find that Jesus actually fulfills that. But from the very beginning, God's plan is to bring all people to himself. And we see it at the end of the book, end of Revelation. That's what he does. Then there's this theme of the vineyard. And we will spend a whole week on that one. That's chapter 5. And then finally, the last thread that'll be on here is the remnant. God always preserves. He never devastates completely. He flooded the earth, but he kept Noah. He wiped out Sodom and Gomorrah, but he kept Lot. And so we'll see that sort of theme within Isaiah too. And I just gave this to you, the start of this, so as you're reading or whatever, you might want to say, oh, yes, I see this, and maybe write a note. That way, when it gets to that section, I can just ask you, what's this about? And you'll have all your notes there. Okay. It sounds like I'm being facetious, but I'm really not. All right, the nation of Israel. What does that mean? What does it mean to be the nation of Israel?
The people.
Okay, so it's a group of people. Is a family a group of people?
It's a big group of people.
Is the attendance of a football game a nation?
Bigger. You want to keep playing this game?
Yeah, yeah. I kind of like it actually. Who can top that?
God's people.
Huh?
God's people.
Well, what makes them God's people?
God.
God. Okay, that's a great answer. Yeah. When did God make them his people?
Abraham.
All right. With Abraham, the people were identified through you, right? You're going to be blessed and be a blessing. But when did they become a nation? Was Abraham a nation? Because Cindy says it's a lot of people, and Abraham's only a single person. When did they become a nation?
Israel. When he named Israel, right?
When he named Israel, when did he do that?
When he separated Israel from his brother, and because they had the two, Ishmael and Israel, right?
I don't know. You're on your own here.
Jacob and Esau is the separation, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Jacob's one person. Cindy says it's a large group of people. So I don't
Bigger
think
than a
that's
football.
Huh? When did they become a nation?
When the tribes all converged.
All right. When did they converge?
I wasn't there, I don't know.
When they went down to Egypt, how many were there?
Well,
Huh?
Well,
Were they all the 12 tribes of Egypt?
No, no, when they came to Egypt during the famine and Joseph was there, how many people came down?
millions,
brothers.
millions.
No, no,
The
no.
brothers,
The
the
brothers.
brothers,
77.
11.
Well, and their family, so
And the-
70 something, 70 something.
Was
Was that large enough to be a nation?
I don't know.
Okay, when they were in Egypt, were they a nation?
No.
They were growing, right? They were growing in population. They got to be a big number. Were they a nation?
Not until they got to the promised land.
No, they were a nation before they got to the promised land. This is key. This is key to understanding their purpose. God pulls them out of Egypt, takes them to Sinai.
Right.
What happens at Sinai?
Makes a covenant.
Disobedient.
Makes a covenant. Is a covenant important for a nation?
Yes,
Why?
because it's like laws.
Exactly. A nation has its own set of laws,
goes to Moses.
right? The fact that we live in the United States means that we don't follow England's laws. We follow our laws. We're a separate nation.
We're supposed to.
Now say we're supposed to.
Well, this is the theory. All right. So laws are one of the things that define a nation. What's the other thing that defines a nation? I'm sorry?
The land where they reside.
So there's a geographic location, and they're taken to the promised land. That's where that nation is going to reside. So they have laws, they have land. What else does a nation need? A leader. All right, so you've hit the three. They all start with L, so you know it's true. You hit them.
Oh,
Yeah, my ear is attuned to alliteration for some reason.
yeah, I know.
All right, so I'm gonna draw you a little picture because we really had trouble with the ad hoc questions. So we're gonna try to build a picture. Assume this is the nation of Israel. It's a circle. It's just a shape. This is the nation of Israel. When God pulls them out of Egypt and He establishes them, He's in charge. God's in charge. He's not in the nation. He's outside the nation, but He's in charge. And one of the things that He does is that He creates offices. A nation doesn't run on its own. It's just a large group of people. But laws have to be created and administered and followed. And you need leadership to make decisions and make things happen. In our country, we have Congress. Congress speaks for the people to establish laws. And the courts speak for the laws to speak to the people. This is what the law means, interprets the law, or this is how you violated the law, and these are the defined punishments. And then you have a president, the executive branch. Israel has positions like that as well, offices like that as well. We have the office of a senator who has a certain role in the government. You have the office of the president who has a certain role in our government. You have the office of a judge who has a certain role in our government. Israel has those same type of offices. The first office is
The priest.
the priest. Who's the first priest? I'm sorry?
Levi.
No, Levi wasn't the first priest. The Levites, the descendants, formed the priestly office. Aaron is the first priest. Why wasn't there a priest before Aaron? Because there's not a nation, right? It's not until they get to Sinai that God forms this nation, and then He establishes offices, and one of the offices is the priesthood. Aaron is the first priest, and then the Levitic line then becomes that office over time. So the nation now has that role, that office filled. Also has an office of king. Who is the first king? Saul was the first king. They originally had judges, which performed the same function. But the people wanted a king like every other nation. And so they said, let's have Saul because he's the tallest and best looking among us. And then God says, no. No, a king has to do a couple of things. He not only has to lead the people, but he represents the people. And he also represents the law. He's the executive. He's the one that's in charge. He's the one that executes the law. So wouldn't it be good if the king has the same heart as the God who created the nation?
David.
David. David has the heart of God. And so that's the one God chooses. This is what your king should be. It should represent me to the people. You should have the same character as me. You should be just, and you should be merciful, and you should be generous, and you should be, you should be humble. You should be all of these things, David. This is what I've chosen you for, because you have the same heart as me. You are reflective of me, and yet you are responsible to manage the people. That's what the office does. Okay. And the third role is the prophet. What's the prophet's role?
Conscience.
Yeah. The prophet speaks for God to the people. The priest speaks to God for the people. It's the high priest that goes into the holiest of holies. It's the high priest that offers the sacrifice. Right? Didn't we talk about that this morning in church?
Yeah.
Yes. Jeff, I love the way Jeff keeps up with us. Right? So one role is towards God from the people, but the prophet is from God to the people. This is the role. This is the office that Isaiah fills in his role as a prophet. He is speaking for God to the people. He speaks a lot to the kings, the people in charge, but he also speaks for the people. So those are the three roles, the three offices that are there. It's interesting is how does the king get in power? Typically.
Down the line.
That's down the line.
Bloodline, yeah.
Right. It's the first male son, then becomes the king, and if he doesn't have a son, it's the first daughter. There's a succession, but it's hereditary, right? And unless you overthrow, which is what happens on this side, unless you overthrow like the Northern Kingdom, then that line will continue unabated based on the progeny of the one above. So when God promises David that the scepter will not leave your house, he's not saying David will live forever, but he's saying your line, your succession, this line of people will not end. And of course, Jesus is in the line of David, and he's our king forever. So it follows. How does the priest get his power? How does he come into office?
Well, the tribes were the Levites.
Right. It's by your heritage.
Yeah.
I am in the line of Levi,
It's
and
chosen by God, though.
it's chosen by God, but the high priest is. But
Right.
the priestly reign it's I'm this family, I'm this section of the country. That's how they get that role. But a prophet's different. A prophet's called. He doesn't acquire it. He's called to it. Let me ask you this question. So those are the offices that are established for this nation of Israel. In what ways is Jesus like a king, or in what way is he a king?
He's a leader.
He's a leader. We're supposed to follow him. And we talked about that Saturday, right?
Yeah.
I call you to follow me. That's what Jesus does. I lead, you follow.
And he's from the bloodline.
And he's from the bloodline of David, so he follows that. What else? What's the other role the king is supposed to do? Supposed to lead the people, but he's also supposed to
Judge.
no?
Protect.
He does that too. He also is to reflect the character of God. We talked about David as the man after God's own heart. Jesus is God. So he reflects that as well. So when we see Jesus, we see didn't Jesus say that himself?
Mhm.
If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. I'm a perfect reflection of God. So Jesus fulfills that kingly role. How about the priestly role? Does Jesus fulfill the priestly role?
Mhm.
Okay, we get agreement because you know where I'm headed with this, right? Jeff's going to talk a whole lot more about that because that's a big part of Hebrews. Okay, so I won't spend more time there. And then in what ways? But I will say this: the priest is an intermediary, right? He goes between us and God. He takes what a priest does is take our sacrifice and brings it to God. In the same way, Jesus does that. He is our priest. He is our intermediate with that. And then, in what ways does Jesus fulfill the prophet role? What does a prophet do? Huh?
He speaks for God.
He speaks for God. And if you hear my words, you hear his words. He is the perfect representation of God. The prophet speaks. And sometimes he quotes and sometimes he interprets what God tells him. What I'm handing out here, this is an article that I found. Thank you for leaving me one. That talks about these three offices. Jesus has the three offices. I'm not going to spend more time on it here, but this is really kind of a great little summary of how Jesus fulfills all three offices that were part of the nation of Israel. And the piece that I got out of that was really interesting is Israel was not created just to be a nation. Israel was created to be a light to the nations so that all men could be drawn to God. And they did not do so well. So God had to have a greater than, to use Jeff's thing. And that's what he has in Jesus. And in those three roles, as prophet, priest, and king, Jesus perfectly fulfills all of those so that he truly is the light to the nations. And that is why this is important for Isaiah, because that's one of the themes of Isaiah is the nation did not, would not, could not be the light that draws the nations to God. And so God had to replace, he uses the term servant, he had to replace the servant Israel with the Messiah, the suffering servant. And it's in that replacement that we get a full fulfillment of what God intends to do. What God intended to do with the nation of Israel, and he's also going to fulfill that completely in Christ. So this is a really interesting article. It's from gotquestions.com. I just thought it was a great little summary. I will leave that with you to explore on your own. What's interesting about it is we started this with, I've told you beforehand what will happen so that when it happens, you will know that I'm sovereign. Well, Isaiah's writing, 500 years before Jesus. And he writes about the Messiah. And he writes about the role of the Messiah and how the Messiah will take the place of the nation because the nation would not fulfill their role as a nation. But Jesus does. And so when that occurs, of course, it occurred 2,000 years ago, we will know that God is sovereign, that God's plan will not be thwarted, that what he says he will do. And there are still things he says he will do that he hasn't done yet. And we can have faith in that. So that's one of the big pieces out of Isaiah that I hope I can communicate. Okay. And I wonder why I'm going to do this, but I'm going to do it because it's what I have on my slide. Let's go back to Deuteronomy, because that's where the office of prophet is established. So there's some neat little pieces in here that we're going to pull in. And Ann, do you mind start reading this time?
The nations you will dispossess, listen to those who practice sorcery or divination. But as for you, the Lord your God has not permitted you to do so. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your fellow Israelites. You must listen to him. For this is what you asked of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, let us not hear the voice of the Lord our God, nor see this great fire anymore, or we will die.
Now, the context of this is, they're at Sinai, Horeb, and they're afraid. There's fire in London and smoke and everything going on the mountain. Don't let God speak to us. We're afraid. Moses, you go up. You go on up there, Moses, and then you tell us what he says. And so that's sort of the thing. We need a prophet to speak to us the words of God. And Moses was that. He was the first prophet. He spoke for God to the people. I love that. I will put my words in his mouth. Right? When I raise up a prophet, I myself will call. I will raise up a prophet like you, and I will put my words in his mouth. He will be my spokesperson. And sometimes he directly quotes. Sometimes a prophet will directly quote what God says. And other times I think they use their own voice to describe what God tells them. And I think we see that a lot in Isaiah. We see a lot of really great imagery, sarcasm, ridiculous comparisons. And I think those are Isaiah's voice, but they're explaining what God told him. Here is the ridiculousness of idolatry. And then he has an illustration of a log. We'll actually read that one. That one's kind of cool. But notice in verse 19. I myself, who's the I there?
God.
Yeah, God. God will call to account who? Who's being called to account? Huh?
The people, the prophets.
Yeah. The prophet will speak my words, either a direct quote or with their own voice, but they will speak what I want them to speak. And if you don't listen to it, what happens?
You better answer.
Huh?
You're going to answer for it.
You're going to answer for it. You're going to be called to judgment. This is my voice through this person. You're not going to listen to it. You're going to be called to account. Verse 20. But this is the other side of that. If a prophet presumes to speak in my name, anything I have not commanded, he's using not only his own voice, but his own words, his own truth. He is to be put to death. The question I ask you is, who puts him to death? Oh, some of you know this history. Who's the one that kills the prophets? Always.
Non-believers.
No, it's not the non-believers. Non-believers think they're just crazy.
Um,
Who is it that puts the prophets to death?
The king?
No, the king doesn't. The king's doing his own thing.
God does.
Huh?
God does.
No,
No.
God
Them down.
There's a lot of false prophets.
The people of the nation.
Who does it through history? Who has done it?
Oh, the priest.
No, it
No,
wasn't the king. It wasn't the priest.
you're getting closer.
Okay.
The prophet.
No, the prophet is the
Oh,
prophet.
yeah, you hit all three of them now.
We gotta,
Threw all the words out there.
let's
God.
let's maybe change this and go to the New Testament. Maybe it figures it out. This is from Matthew 23. If you remember Matthew 23, woe to you, 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 on down the line. And
You snakes, you brood or vipers, how will you escape being condemned to hell? Therefore I am sending you prophets and sages and teachers. Some of them you will kill and crucify. Others you will flog in your synagogues and pursue from town to town. And so upon you will come all the righteous blood that has been shed on earth, from the blood of righteous of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar.
okay, so who murders the prophets? Huh?
The people, their peers.
Not their peers, because these aren't prophets that are killing
The
them.
righteous.
And it's not the people, and it's not the righteous, because they're killing people that are the voices of God. So who's killing the prophets?
Clearly, we don't know.
All right, let me see if I can help you. Some of them you will kill. You, who's Jesus speaking to?
Being us, the prophets.
Not to the people.
Pharisees?
He's talking to the
leaders.
religious leadership, the
Yeah,
Pharisees.
the Pharisees.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Some of them you will kill, and others you will flog in your synagogues. So this is the religious worship experience that becomes in Jesus's day. It's not true to God at all. It's true to themselves. It's their traditions. It's their power. It's their authorities that they have in the world, and that's what they're subjecting the prophets to. They're not listening to the word of God telling them, but over their history, they have killed the prophets. And there's the example there of Zechariah, son of Berechiah. And so upon you, you brood of vipers, you religious leaders that think you have it all figured out or not listening to me, upon you, I will bring condemnation. Upon you, that blood is there.
Hypocrites.
Yes, very much so. Very much so. And what I want to try to do is pull this together that'll lead us into next week. Timing's just about good for this.
So do we know who kills the false prophets?
I'm so confused.
Still confused.
It's the religious leadership.
Oh,
Pharisees and
The
Sadducees.
religious leadership
Okay.
are not following
in
God,
charge
they're
of the
following
church.
their own traditions. They're not.
And if they don't say what they're saying, then they kill them.
okay.
They don't agree with.
It's the leaders.
Yes.
And figures.
And if they're not in charge,
Okay,
somebody
all
else.
right, I'm with you now. Okay.
He didn't like that. He rejected it.
Okay, well,
He got rejected.
I thought that would be less confusing than it was, but let's just put that on me.
Okay, it's on us.
One of the things, if you read, and I encourage you to read chapter 23 of Matthew for several reasons. One, go through this list of the charges that Jesus levels against the religious leadership.
Mhm.
It's almost as if he's filing a lawsuit that says, you've done this wrong. You've done this wrong. These are the charges against you. I'm going to indict you for this. I'm going to bring a lawsuit and bring you to judgment. And that is exactly what Jesus is doing. It's a lawsuit against the religious leadership. The first chapter of Isaiah is exactly the same way. It is bringing a suit against the people, against the leadership in Israel, or in Judah, the southern kingdom, that are not living up to their responsibilities. And we'll see the same elements of the lawsuit, the same way that Jesus addressed this. That's how Isaiah is going to start this book. And what's interesting is if you go through Matthew 23 and you look at each of those charges and then you read through the prophets, they're the exact same charges. The exact same. You're not doing this right. You're not acting justly. You are not loving mercy. You are not walking humbly. And you are not with me. From Micah, that little, you are not following me. You are on your own. There's a great exchange Jesus has with the Pharisees that talks about, he says, we're sons of Abraham. No, you're not. You're sons of the devil. No, you're not sons of Abraham at all. You are not following the way that you're to be. You're following your father, the devil. A great exchange. So I'll leave that with you, but I do want to emphasize several things. I'm doing this here because we will hear this over and over and over again. It's not that they didn't hear God. They heard the words of the prophet, but they're really deaf to what God's trying to tell them. And it's not that they don't see what God does. Show us a sign. I've shown you signs, but I'm blind to what God reveals. Read John 9 about the blind man. And the blind man finally says, I don't know. I'm just a guy, but I see God acting. So I believe in God. What about you? You see God acting, but you don't understand what God reveals. They know the scriptures, but they don't understand what God intends. The interview with Nicodemus. How can you be the teacher of Israel and you not understand this? You know the scriptures forward, backwards, sideways, but you don't understand what I'm doing. And the third one is you walk religiously, but you are so out of step with me. And you see this. They hear, but they're deaf. They see, but they're blind. They know, but they don't understand. They walk, but they are out of step. And we'll see those four verbs over and over and over and over. Again. And as I read through it in preparing this, I thought, boy, that sounds so much like who Jesus ministers to. The deaf person, the blind person. He seeks to get them to understand. The woman at the well who asked about the Messiah. He has that conversation. You know the facts, but you don't really understand. You don't have it put together. Let me help you there. And then follow me. Jesus always tells people to follow me. Don't be out of step with me, but follow me. Understand why I'm walking this way, and so that you can walk that way too. Those 4 verbs repeat over and over and over again.
But the disciples were like that too.
Huh?
My disciples were like that too.
Oh yeah, we're all like that.
We're all like that.
We're no different.
No.
And I'll conclude with this, is that when you read Matthew 23, it reads, as I said, it reads like an indictment. And that's exactly how Isaiah is going to start his book, which fortunately will start next week. We will start with a prophetic lawsuit that walks through the charges that are against the nation of Judah. So anyway, I hope that's enough of an introduction to the book. I hope you're excited about finally getting into it, because I am. It's a great book, and it really, for me, it really pulls together some things I know from the New Testament, but now I know why I know them, and that's what I hope to share. Okay, I'm going to fill this and then.